I'm Sayla.
And I'm Rebecca.
And this is Saying and Suggesting. First, we're going to talk about denotation. Denotation is the literal or primary meaning of a word, in contrast to the feelings or ideas that the word suggests. We have to understand the literal meaning of words before we can understand the feelings or attitudes attached to them. So denotation is the basis for connotation. Denotation is used when writing objectively, like mathematical or scientific papers, but it's not used a lot in creative writing because it's kind of constricting. Next, we're going to talk about connotation, which is the opposite. It's the suggesting of a meaning by a word apart from the thing it explicitly names or describes. All words carry cultural and emotional associations, and words can have either a positive, negative, or neutral connotation depending on the context and social, cultural, and personal experiences of people. Connotation is used a lot in creative writing because it helps the author or poet to create deeper meaning within a text. Here's an example of connotation. The word vagrant in the first example is negative because it has a negative attitude attached to it. Neutral is people with no fixed dress because that doesn't really have any emotional
like impact or anything.
Yeah.
You're just kind of straight in the facts.
And positive would be homeless because home is better than like
a house.
Or exactly. Now we're going to talk about connotation versus denotation.
Yep. And extending on that home versus house thing.
Yeah, exactly. House would be the example of denotation because it doesn't really have any emotional.
Wait, hold up. Wait, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
No, you're good. Would be because it doesn't really have any emotion tied to it, whereas home brings up feelings like family and warmth. The next one we're going to talk about is cheap versus affordable. Cheap has kind of a negative connotation because cheap is, is better than...
It's something that could be of lesser value.
Yeah, exactly.
For a lower price.
And then riots versus protest. Riots has the emotional association of like violence and chaos. So that's whereas protest doesn't really have an emotional connection.
Yeah, so it's all about the basics, right? Have you ever read a page or a poem or an article in class and end up with a different interpretation of, a small theme, a motif, than the person next to you? Well, don't worry, because that's normal. Authors intend that for smaller applications of their theme, you'll come up with different perceptions of it.
Yeah.
But if you don't recognize the overarching themes of a work, then you probably don't have a good understanding of the connotation or denotation in the piece. And that's why, now that you've learned a little bit more of this information about connotation and denotation, it's really important in literature because it can just be the basics of understanding anything in higher level literature. So tone. Basic things you need to know for tone. When you're just looking at the tone of a work, the denotation would be like the words, the plot, etc., like what's happening. And that's what you can see is just all that's there in like scientific writing or elementary writing. But especially in poetry, the connotation is like the tone or the implicit meaning is what's going to give the work, express the author's opinion in work. So to talk about this, we're going to talk about the song White Winter Hymnal by the Fleet Foxes because it has like a darker meaning in the lyrics, but the song itself has like a very peaceful atmosphere, peaceful tone, especially if there's music behind it.
I was following the pack, all swallowed in their coats, with scarves of red tied round their throats, to keep their little heads from falling in the snow. And I turned round, and there you go, and Michael, you would fall, and turn how white snow the red as strawberries in the summertime.
So, yes, Rebecca.
Yep, that's me. Little example there. Something
Yes.
I really liked recently.
But yeah, it's really interesting because in an interview about the song, the author talked about how it was meant to express the loss of innocence viewed by a child. And y'all high schoolers, it's nothing sexual. He related it to his friends, who, when he would hang out with them in high school, they wouldn't really be doing anything bad, but then they'd graduate, and a year later, some of his friends were involved in like gang violence and selling drugs, and it just kind of shocked him. And having that positive connotation of kind of helped to express like that innocent side of it, where the negative annotation of the words kind of the juxtaposition is intentional. And so a lot of people will misinterpret this song, and they'll say like, oh, you know, it's only the positive connotation, it's only innocent things, and oh, it's only the negative connotation, there's nothing really positive because of that. But it's really the combination of the denotation and the connotation, that tone, that really helps to build the author's ideas. Theme! Gotta love that theme.
Mm-hmm.
So your understanding of the theme can depend on your understanding of connotation and denotation, as we've been telling you. An example of like an explicit understanding, like a theme being explicitly stated, which happens sometimes, but not always. Example, Susan reflected that Charles seemed to be the villain of the story. Yeah, it's very rare. It makes me laugh when I see it in a work, but it works. An implicit example of theme stated in a work, basically like, relying on connotation. Susan looked at Charles and only saw a cold, dark emptiness in his eyes, the same look he gave his lieutenant before he ordered the mass murder of a town. I mean, you get the same idea. Charles is the villain. We know this now.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Tolkien's poem! This is a great example of thematic connotation and denotation, because it's often misquoted. So as a whole, let's talk about the whole of the poem first. Actually, let's talk about the poem first. All that is gold does not glitter, not all those who wander are lost. The old that is strong does not wither, deep roots are not reached by the frost. From the ashes a fire shall be woken, a light from the shadows shall spring. Renewed shall be the blade that was broken, the crownless again shall be king. Again, this is J.R.R. Tolkien's poem from the book Dork, The Fellowship of the Ring. Yeah, first one in the Lord of the Rings series. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So overall, there's a theme about this like strength and this like flame, this fire that won't be extinguished even though other people don't appreciate it, which reflects Aragorn's role in the novel, as everyone seems to disrespect him because he's not outwardly dressed like king's lineage, even though he is, and he does some things that makes you strange or a little bit different from like the normal social things, like he does wander around. But what he actually is doing is he's protecting people and healing people throughout the book, and he is a descendant of the lost kings of Gondor, and so even though other people don't perceive his goodness because it doesn't mean it's not there. Now there's a specific line in this that's often quoted on like Pinterest and Instagram, wherever people are posting things. Not all who wander are lost. And this takes more of the denotation of that theme, because it kind of it's read and implied that not all those that are wander are lost, because you have to be lost to find yourself, which is a nice notion, but it's not quite what Tolkien intended. And it can show you the difference between connotation and denotation in a work.
Next, we're going to talk about symbolism.
It's symbolism!
Yes.
The big one!
Symbolism is the use of objects to signify ideas and qualities by giving them symbolic meanings that are different from their literal sense. Yes.
Yes, and actually, there are two types of symbols. There are symbols we all agree upon, and there are symbols that can be interpreted differently. So, for example, the American flag. What does it represent?
Freedom.
America.
Yes.
We all agree. It represents freedom and America. The Christian cross. What does it represent? Christians.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, we all agree. You see that? That's what it's going to mean. But there's a second type of symbolism that this will be more helpful in connotation and denotation, will be more helpful when you're interpreting. And it's stuff that can be interpreted many different ways. It's talking about that motif stuff. And it's actually part of the definition of symbolism that you don't have the same interpretation of it. Sometimes authors can be really, really vague. We won't bring any of that up, but as you go further into exploring higher level literature, they're going to get probably more vague.
Yes.
Yeah, so connotation is just that feeling attached to the symbol.
Yes. Like a rose, romance, love, like that
Yes,
sort
the
of
love
thing.
attached to the rose. Denotation, the plot, why stuff happens, what's there. Oh, look, there's a rose.
That's
We're in
it.
a garden.
That's it.
Yep.
No symbols. Yes, exactly.
Because, we gotta be there. But obviously, we know something more is going down if people randomly start flying, or if someone cares way too much about that rose or too much about a crown, and you're like, this is something weird. Quick tip: it's probably symbolism or satire,
Yes.
which uses symbolism. We're not going to go into satire today. So, fun example time. We're going to talk about Edward Allan Poe.
Edgar.
Thank you. Edgar Allan Poe, and his use of symbolism in two of his works, A Telltale Heart. Well,
It's loading.
Pardon our technical difficulties, but I'm just going to keep explaining. So, one symbol from A Telltale Heart that is an example of a symbol that can be agreed upon. Like, we generally agree upon that when the murderer in A Telltale Heart is sitting there being interviewed by the police, sitting over the dead body that he chopped up and put under the floorboards, he begins to hear this heartbeat. And in all of the literature classes that I've read this in and people that I've talked to, everyone agrees that's his conscience. It represents his guilt for the murder. You really won't find that much of a dissimilar interpretation of that. We all pretty much agree. But, however, a different symbol in one of Poe's works is the raven from The Raven. You see, the raven can mean many different things. Nevermore! Ah! That's fun. Sorry. Anyway, so just to jog your memory, the raven. Throughout the poem, the raven, Poe, I'm pretty sure it's a Poe, but like the narrator is like battling against this dark force represented by the raven. And many people can read this differently. It could represent his regrets. It could represent like his conscience for sins or things he's done in the past he's not proud of. It could represent like some illness or death that's haunting him, or it could even just represent pain, bad luck, and misfortune. No one really knows, and it doesn't really matter how you read it. You still get the main general idea with a smaller motif changing.
Yes.
So they can be giving you, even though they're literature, I'm the only reason because people, and that's what it means, but also do new formulas. And its vagueness to interpret it.
Yeah, in denotation, when authors are get your from it.
Yes, because if you denotation to the denotation, then you can understand it. And things in part.
Thank
Thank
you
for paying on.